it's like the uncanny valley of programming. Like it's happened for image generation where things started to look very real, but kind of not very real. And now it feels like we're way past this. It looks perfectly real. Programming is going through the same change. I just find it hard to believe that it's not going to work at larger scale. I see no signs of stopping, and the labs are investing everything they have in there. So, I'm pretty confident.
All right, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the TWIML AI podcast. I am your host, Sam Charrington. Today, I'm joined by Alex Pesant. Alex is an AI lead at Lovable. Before we get going, be sure to take a moment to hit that subscribe button wherever you're listening to today's show. Alex, welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
I'm super excited to jump into our chat. We're going to be talking about all things vibe coding. To get us started, I'd love to have you share a little bit about your background.
Yeah. So I've been at Lovable since July last year. I was one of the first engineers. That was a little bit before things took off, and it became what it is today. It's been super fun building this. I believed in the mission from the start of letting anybody write code without knowing how to code. I believe a lot in this, and I joined Lovable because I actually worked on an agent that topped Swebench for a day or two. It was called Delvin, um, and that was on the GPD 4.0 times. And the scores at the time, the high scores were 23, 24%, and now we are at 80% plus on Swebench Lite. It's pretty crazy how things have gone, really. And yeah, so I've been working mostly as software engineer and then product manager over the past 15 years. I am a failed ML student. I actually studied machine learning 15 years ago, and I followed the online courses with Andrew Ng, the OG
Everybody who did
Coursera.
that, raise your hand.
Yeah, I've done it even a couple of times over the years after that because I worked as a software engineer, so I was not touching really ML. And at the time, I thought it was too late for me to do machine learning. That I thought it was too late, and I was writing neural networks in MATLAB on my computer, and it was before GPUs were a thing, or right at the time it started to be a thing for machine learning, and I have regrets there that I didn't pursue this, with higher conviction. Um, and I've kept playing with these things on the side a lot over the years, building small models, and I'm super happy that I found my way back around this from the application layer. But I love working with this technology. It's just incredible, and I think this is kind of just the beginning. The exponential is real.
Yeah, I wonder sometimes if, having that experience in the space versus coming into it fresh is, a bit of a handicap versus an advantage in a sense of I often find myself processing things through a lens of having been in the space for, a dozen years, whatever. Um, and it's moving so quickly. Sometimes I feel like that doesn't serve me. It's like if I could just look at this without all that baggage.
I fully agree. I see some younger people. They are 18 or 19. We have some of these cracked engineers at Lovable, as we call them, and they don't understand a lot of things, but sometimes it's for the better. They just know what the tools of today can do. They are very creative in using AI, even more so than most of us, because I mean we're still pretty tech savvy. Obviously, we're not really like behind, but they don't care. This is just how things work. And going forward, I think this is gonna be even more amplified and even more, which is a bit scary. As you get older, you want to stay in touch with how things work. And yeah, I think there are quite a bit of people who have not maybe liked LLM as much as they should because it kind of took away a lot of the craft of ML because you could kind of brute force your way through a lot of things now with LLMs. But I'm just excited about moving to the next layer of abstraction on top and figure out, okay, what can we do with this crazy technology?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. The clear thing for us to talk about is vibe coding, which, in some ways feels a bit kind of flash, I don't know, trendy. And the kind of the analyst in me wants to kind of step back and take apart like AI assisted coding in all of its glory. Um, And so, maybe I'll lean a little bit on that and have you, start off by talking about how you think about, where Lovable sits, presumably vibe coding, in this broader AI assisted coding sphere or ecosystem.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's pretty fun to sometimes look back at the timelines of the AI assisted coding, as you said, where I think the first big product hit, I guess, was Copilot, really, for a lot of people. I actually don't remember the
Or
year of
even
the or
GPT-2, right? With
yeah,
hey, let's
yeah,
let's write this web page with
yeah,
or GPT-3, like
yeah.
but yeah,
GPT-2 was still kind of pretty quickly nonsensical, but GPT-3 was like, wow, this is starting to look like something. And then Copilot for developers really was the first thing where you realize, hey, this is kind of useful. Like this is
right.
yeah, and uh, and I think it would be interesting to go back in the past and look at comments online from people with the timestamps of where they're saying this was never going to scale or get better, but I think a lot of people had this feeling that there was no reason it would stop at completing your the next line, and then it could do 2 lines and 3 lines and 4 lines. And then obviously ChatGPT came out with GPT 3.5. And I remember the night it came out, I was working at a medtech company here in Stockholm, and I couldn't stop using it for coding with me. I was just testing it. I was working on some plugins for some UI portal we had, and I was just asking things. Hey, can you try this? Can you try that? And I was kind of copy pasting, and I think in hindsight, it was probably terrible, extremely terrible. But I was shocked at how good things were. And where I'm going with this is that, at the time, I think it felt, at least for me, it felt pretty easy to see where this was going. And the future was that we would stop writing code as we do it now. We would not be typing the characters as we are now, and we would move on to higher level of abstractions. And going to the vibe coding term, coined by Andre Caprafi. I think I remember his tweet saying the hardest programming language is English now, and I think that's something we could see coming at Lovable. And so Anton and Fabian, the founders, they created GPT Engineer. That was one of the largest, most popular open source projects that came right after GPT-4, I think. And I think at this moment, like so many of us really knew, okay, this is happening. This is really happening. Things are gonna get kind of crazy, and I think they have gotten kind of crazy. And whenever I hear people saying that the progress is not as fast as it used to be, I think we're the timelines are just being distorted, because if you look at the calendar, it's actually kind of crazy how things are moving, and we are also jaded by the progress, and we expect it to be normal. But it's really incredible. And so the perspective where we come from is that our belief is that this is working, this is going to work. You are going to be able to write code without knowing how to code at all. And I think I have a hard time understanding why some think this is not a legit way of thinking, because when you write code, you're not writing machine code, you're writing some other abstraction on top of it, and that code gets compiled, and at no point you ever look at it. So what is the difference between vibe coding and vibe compiling? It's the same thing. When you compile your code, it is translated into something else, and when you're vibe coding and programming in English, it's translated into something else. And
It's conceptually the same thing from the perspective that the language that you're coding in is not the language that the computer cares about. But I think the thing that maybe people are responding to is injecting this very statistical element into the middle of the mix, which makes things which causes problems, right?
it does, but I think, at least the way I see it, is that it's a transition phase where things are, it's like the uncanny valley of programming, where things are starting to look, like it's happened for image generation, for example, where things started to look very real, but kind of not very real. Like, and now it feels like we're way past this. It looks perfectly real. Same with video now, since a couple of weeks back. And if it's programming is going through the same change, and I just find it hard to believe that it's not going to work at larger scale. Obviously, it's a bit like self-driving cars. There's a long tail of things that are not going to work straight away. But Lovable as it is today can already build pretty crazy apps. To be honest, I've been I've been working here for more than a year, and I've been, using the product all the time, and I often rebuild the same apps over and over as a way to, test things and do my vibe checks. Speaking of, and I, sometimes nowadays when I build things, I kind of run out of idea for my little app I'm building because it's just working. It's doing the thing I want, and it's really getting to a point where it's really impressive. Like, I'm not trying to sell our product or anything. Like, I mean, vibe coding in general is getting super impressive. And if you use coding assistants like Cloud Code or Codex, it's also getting pretty crazy. So I see no signs of stopping, and the labs are investing everything they have in there. So, I'm pretty confident.
Yeah, I should be clear that I'm a believer in, both vibe coding and AI assisted coding. Having used a variety of different tools, like, there is, they certainly work to a degree now, depending on what you want to do. I think, where I hear people reacting kind of negatively or pushing back, I think one, it's like, let's set aside a certain amount of cope. Like, I'm a software engineer and like this thing is threatening my livelihood. So it doesn't work poo poo. Like, let's set that aside. Um, I think there's a legitimate like pushback to like, software engineers, software engineers are cooked, like that whole meme, like, don't study software engineering, like it's going to be written all by code and with the implication that like it's going to happen tomorrow or today, or it's we're there already. Like, I think some people, that's something that I would push back on, right? Like, we're not there. Like, we need software engineers. We need, skilled, people to apply these tools. Um, And I think that comes off as like poo pooing them when really it's more like pushing back on, bombast.
I, I think I totally agree with that perspective. By the way, we're hiring software engineers at Lovable. We're not pretending we can be replaced. And and it's the same thing. Like Dario Amodei from Anthropic was saying. Maybe you've seen this online 6 months ago
AI is
that
going to write
yeah,
90% of the code in
90%.
6 months.
And
Yeah.
and they're hiring tons of engineers, but I don't think these statements are contradictory at all, to be honest. I think that you get so much more
There's a lot
leverage
more
now.
code, and we need a lot
Yeah.
more engineers to wade through all this code that the AI is generating.
Yeah, so maybe there's this
That's
angle
one
of
way to think about it.
you need to hire people to fix the vibe coded code, which is maybe a part of it, to be honest. But I think that this is more that you can just do so much more now, and there's much more to do. So the level of ambition humans have will never go down. So whatever the tools you have are, you will need more people to just help to get more things done, even when you have very powerful AIs. And so I don't think there's too much of a contradiction there, saying that you're hiring software engineers, yet you believe that AI can write most of the code. Like, I think for a lot of the tasks we do, we don't write the code, but we still need to think about it, and we need to think about, the user experience. What is the thing we're trying to build? What is the actual problem? And you need, at the moment, at least you still need humans to have some sort of desire to accomplish something, and to build a product based on some data plus some emotions, and and a vision. And we need more of these people at Lovable, because you can build things so quick. So you want to even have even more people to test things faster. So it's like a spiral. It's accelerating all the time, and the code that is written, the characters are not typed by us to a large extent. That I think is true as well.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think about it through a couple of lenses. One, through the enterprise lens. Like, if you think about the software that exists to help run the typical enterprise, like the amount of software that exists there isn't fixed at whatever quantity it is because all the problems are solved. It's because like there was some very strict prioritization because they couldn't possibly have all the software that they would have wanted to automate all the processes and help make all the decisions, et cetera. So they build what's most important. Through large projects, they buy a bunch of other stuff, and a bunch of needs end up unmet. And, part of the promise, I think, of, again, whether we call it vibe coding, AI assisted coding, agentic coding, whatever, is that, now we can kind of take off a much larger bite of kind of these problems and, automate them. And I think the same thing is really true in an interesting way on kind of the personal slash consumer perspective. This idea of like the single purpose application or the single consumer, single customer, single user application. Like I've got a need. It's not a need that's big enough for, someone to try to solve as a, via a company. But like now these tools allow me to just solve the need that I have in a way that, works specifically for me. Like I think those are both, really powerful, indications that there's a lot of opportunity here.
Yeah, no, this is here to stay. I think there's no, I don't think there's a bubble. There's a lot of hype cycles, obviously, but I think the value created is real, and we have lots of users to prove it. Lots of happy users, sometimes starting businesses, so they're trying to create software for others to use. Lots of people building what you call this before, like personal software. I've seen some incredible projects where the number of users is maximum 5. It's a family, like a household, where some people have built their entire household management systems to a degree that it's honestly unbelievable. Like they've gone further than anybody has ever thought about the problem, and it's just for their single home. I find this incredible and so cool. And it creates value for them. They're getting value out of it. It makes their lives better. Some others are, using it for raising money. So they're building prototypes and they're going very quickly, validating ideas, building the MVPs, and then, trying to raise money. This happened a lot with Lovable products as well. Others use it just for designing things and get a feel for, prototyping. There's just so many use cases. It's a little bit like ChatGPT in the sense that it's very, very general, and there's and there are people who use it also as just for having fun, just building things like gaming a little bit. I also think it's pretty cool. Um, so there's a lot of a real value being created, and that's here to stay for sure.
So I don't think we ever really bit off kind of taxonomizing the AI coding ecosystem. Yeah, I think it's, is it fair to say that Lovable is going after, you know, what I think it was like pure play vibe coding, meaning, I'm an individual or like maybe a small team, a small startup or something like that. And I'm like, I've got this idea for a thing. I'm starting from pretty much a blank slate. I need to incorporate kind of front end and back end. I think those things all, those are some of the things that to me characterize maybe like a more principled view of like what vibe coding is, relative to, you know, AI assisted coding or other types of AI assisted coding, because there's, AI assisted coding would be the umbrella, then agentic coding would be the umbrella under that, then vibe coding would be under that. And I say all that, and then, part of me says, like, as always, dude, you're trying to make too much meaning in here, and it's all the same thing, and people are throwing these terms around willy nilly, and like, the distinction, it's a distinction without a difference for in a lot of conversations, at least.
Yeah, no, I do think you're right though. When you hear vibe coding, you probably think a lot more about creating new projects from scratch rather than working on an existing code base, for example, where even though we talk about these things internally, we can say, oh, this was vibe coded, even though we work with an existing code base. But I think you're right in your general perception. Yeah, at the end of the day, it's all the same thing. But maybe vibe coding right now is on a smaller scale, I guess, smaller scale of projects, right? Um, and there's a whole landscape of different companies and products attacking the problem through different angle. That's for sure. And so Lovable is starting to from the empowering the 99%. That's our mission. The 99% of people who cannot code, and of course, this has a very consumer oriented connotation there. And this is where we're starting from. We want to empower all of those who can't code to build things. But if you think about it, it actually does not really mean consumer, it means, even in enterprise, there's a lot of people who cannot code, who are not developers. And we have lots of users, for example, designers and PMs, building prototypes internally, and like speeding up the communication process with engineers or even stakeholders, just saying, hey, we could do it like this, look at it, it actually works, like just try it out. Which I think, I mean, if you worked in any software company that's sufficiently large, you understand how much communication and overhead there is, and things getting lost in translation, and the frustration from a non-technical stakeholder to try to sell something, to developers or even product managers,
Yeah.
where you can kind of
Please,
just,
just as one feature, it'll change everything.
yes, yeah, and now you can kind of just say, hey, this could work like this. I even tried 10 different versions of it because it took me an hour. It doesn't cost much. Um, so the vision that I think of Lovable goes probably a lot deeper than we think in the start, because we really want to power the businesses of tomorrow as well. We talk a lot about the first solo corn, and I think this company might be built on top of Lovable, because this is really what we're trying to achieve. Like, we bring everything under one place where you can start your company and build a company if you want to and be successful. And I think the the incentives of individual users and small businesses and enterprise are the same at the end of the day. Just trying to build great products and move as fast as possible. And vibe coding products are, they're helping you getting there. So we have potential users really everywhere, and this is just a start for us. Obviously, in this journey, we're in small company, new company. We have a lot to learn, and we want to learn, what everybody needs for their use cases, because obviously enterprise and consumers are different.
To some degree, we're talking about this idea of democratization of software or of code, like it's a new thing, but it's not at all a new thing. And like we've got, I don't know, a decade or more of kind of low code, no code, as a prior to all of this vibe coding stuff. And one thing that I'm finding interesting, when we looked at the recent OpenAI, agent tool, we're starting to incorporate some of these like visual GUI, low code, no code esque ideas into the idea of, building agents or building things using AI. Like, I think the question in here is, given that you're going after this 99%, like, is code the right thing that, the right kind of, medium of communication or currency or something? Or do you envision like some higher level yet abstraction that, whether it's visual or something else, like, is there something between English and code, or is there a visual thing that sits alongside that is going to either be required or be an accelerator to, enable folks to really build things?
Yeah, I was a little bit surprised by the OpenAI agent builder, um, because it's very, as you said, low code, like a lot of dragging around and manual things, which, I don't know. You would expect something where you can just chat and say, "Hey, this is what I want." I think, and I mean, the whole reason vibe coding products are so cool is and powerful is because they write code. Because you can do anything with code. There is no limitations, and there is no built-in guardrails, which sound good for protecting yourself from doing something that's not working. But I think basically my stance is that models are getting so good that you really want to remove the guardrails. You want to set the models free as much as possible for a lot of scenarios. So I was a bit surprised that they went for this approach. Um, when it comes to what's the right medium for communicating to users, I think you're right that uh, when I think especially when things do not work, because when things work, when you ask for something and it works, like why would you want to look at the code or any diagram or anything, right? It's working, so you're gonna focus on something else. But when things maybe are not working and you need help, then looking at code is definitely not an option for a lot of our users. And even for an engineer, if you just open a code base that you don't know, it's going to take you a long time to get familiar with it. Like I've done this a lot with some of my own Lovable projects, and I clone them and I look at them, and I don't know how it works. I've never looked at it, even though I know the projects very well. So it's the same thing. And so I think we want to keep code as this sort of very strong way of doing whatever you're asking for. But there is definitely a feeling that the UX of the future is still not really there today, where we're going to find ways of being a lot more visual and interactive, and try to always surface to you whatever makes the most sense for you to understand how things work, or even how to reason about what you should do next. Because like vibe coding is basically product management. Essentially, it's just thinking about, okay, sequencing. What should I start with? What should I do next? How can I validate my idea? If you're really serious about building an app for users, when should I publish it? How should I? What should I do in the product to keep our users? You start thinking about retention loops, or the sort of higher level concepts. So if you're serious about this, you probably need different ways to visualize it than just text, 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 or code. And I'm very excited for this, and I think we will try to have a really nice take on this that feels more AI native than just something like Agent Builder. But yeah, it's I agree with you. It's going to be very interesting, and again, with great power comes great responsibility, and when things are more powerful, they're more likely to go wrong as well. And I think that's probably why OpenAI went the way they did.
Yeah, there's a couple of directions I want to go in this conversation, and I'm mostly putting this out there as a little bit of a bookmark. One is like, how Lovable works, what you needed to do behind the scenes to get all this going. But I think folks will also find a lot of value in like your assessment of the state of the art from a vibe coder's perspective, in terms of what's working today and what's not working today. And I think I want to start there, because it's a bit of a natural segue from what we were just talking about. Um, and just as the tools and models are evolving quickly, that is evolving super quickly too. Like, um, it's fine. I was just thinking about this the other day because I was playing around with, I think the new Gemini Enterprise has its own kind of take on the agent builder thing. And one of the prompts was like, "You are a X," and like that always feels like dated to me. The personification in a prompt, and it kind of makes me think about like how quickly, when I think about the evolution of vibe coding, like, it was first like, okay, we've got a text box and we're going to type in this thing that we want to see, and we're going to hit a button, and then we're just going to keep talking to this thing and telling it like, what we want to see next, right? Kind of like a slot machine of code. Um, and then I think, as a community, we got a lot more sophisticated about it. And like, we'd like make PRDs and turn those into task lists. And like, we'd have the agent iterate through that and, maybe do some testing. And that's mostly where I've gotten to. And I want to know what's next also. I want to know what's beyond. What are you seeing beyond that? I also, um, there's a little bit of dissonance. And I think this goes back to the conversation that we had about like people poo pooing it. Like, I'm always trying to like, you know, s- wrap my head around like the impression you get with folks. "Oh, I just like type this in and it's all, it all works." Right. And that's not my experience. Like, a particular point is like, I find that I personally have much better results when I actually look at the code that, is returned to me, reason about it, have kind of a broad kind of architectural direction, and kind of push the model, the agent in that direction as opposed to the slot machine. But, on social media, like, yeah, I don't ever look at the code, blah, blah, blah. Like I've got my, I guess the meme is like, I've got my 50K a month ARR app and I've never looked at the code once. And so that's really a long way of saying like, you know, where do you think like the kind of cutting edge techniques are? Like what's BS? Like what really works? Like how do you approach it? All of that.
So the models we have right now are extremely powerful, and I would say they're extremely smart in the sense that they know what to do next given some new piece of information. So if you think about agents being essentially a loop of tool calling, like just to make it simple, tool calling that you get some results from your environment and then you take the next action. One thing that's changed a lot since my days of building my first agent a couple of years back is that agents are excellent at knowing what to do next. I would say that they're probably better than humans for a lot of things, like deciding when oh, now I should probably search the web because of this result. I should do it right now and not before. Oh, I should maybe take a step back. They're starting to get really really good at this stuff. And quite often when we fail the models is because we're not giving them the right feedback and the right pieces of context. We talk about context engineering now. It's the new way of saying prompt engineering. But essentially, when you have an agent, you're just making API calls to an LLM provider, right? If you zoom in, it's just a loop of API calls. That's it. And for each API call, you have a certain amount of context. You can stuff things in, and I do think that for no one out there is even close to mastering this at the moment. There's still so much that can be done to think on every single iteration. What could we add? What do we know could be useful at this moment to just guide and nudge the model in a better direction? Because the models, given the signals, they will really be excellent at finding the next step. And I think this is where we have a lot of work to do, and everybody has a lot of work to do. And that even if models were to stop improving, I think products like Lovable would still improve a lot over the next year or two, because there's just so much stuff that's just not done and invested in, because there's just so much going on, so much low hanging fruits everywhere, and I often hear people in the field of proper ML and LLM research, saying the same thing, that is low hanging fruits everywhere. We feel the same. um, but then the one areas that where the models are not good at enough at the moment still, I think, is software engineering, which sounds a little bit weird to say, but they are really good at writing code, but they're not really good yet at thinking about a code base. Trying to reason, like what you were saying before. You have to look at the code, and you're trying to apply your skills and say, hey, maybe we should structure things differently and do things differently. I think this is where models are still not amazing, but also the agents, the frameworks, and the agents out there are also not really good at incorporating this into the flow. If we talk about agents being just a simple loop of tool calling, maybe this is wrong. This is not the right way of thinking about it at the moment. You see, if you use Cloud Code, for example, you see all the sub agents you can invoke, and you're starting to recreate this sort of a hierarchy of different concerns. Like, my concern is low level code, and my concern is the architecture. And I don't really like this sort of personas where you start recreating artificial boundaries like with humans, because I mean, LLMs are better than this. They should be better than us, and be able to be a great product manager and coder at the same time. Uh, but that's something that's still pretty hard at the moment, I think. And where this is going next, I think, is more like on the application layer side, is asking this question. That, so I believe that vibe coding is working and is gonna work really really well. So when it works, what's next? For products that are building apps with you, when everybody can build an app. So what do you need as someone trying to build something? How can we make the friction go away? Because there's so much friction that has nothing to do with the models in general. And going back to the UX of it as well, I don't think we found yet the correct UX, and I'm excited for that, and using LLMs everywhere, of course, and agents, and not just in the code generation pipeline, but in the entire journey through an app like Lovable. I think things are going to look very different in a year than they do now.
Yeah, all that said, are there practices that you found that differentiate the folks that have a lot of success in building, reasonably complex, above average complexity applications with a tool like Lovable relative to folks that fail or aren't able to get to the finish line with their projects?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think I think one way to be successful is to know what you want. So first you have to know what you want, I think, which implies that you need to be good at communicating with the model, the same way you would have to be good at communicating with a coworker. Um, I talk about this a lot with users. Um, like the expectations some users can have on a model to understand what they mean are sometimes extremely high. And if you were to show the same conversation to another human, they would not understand what you mean when you ask for something in 5 words. They would just be asking, wait, I don't understand, this is very ambiguous, what are you, can you describe this a little bit more? And then I think we have a lot less patience with AI in general sometimes, when we assume that they know everything we know and understand everything we mean. So I think very powerful users of Lovable are using, we call that chat mode. So it's a mode where you can chat and plan a little bit deeper. So you take your time to prepare what you're going to do. You make sure that you're on the same page, you and the model, basically. And then you can go into the implementation phase where things are a lot more specified. So it's what you were saying before about PRDs, essentially, that you want to think about communication and thinking about things before. The second thing, going back to more what I was saying about product managers, is to try to think in terms of sequencing. What needs to come before what. So it's like sequencing slash software design at the same time. How can I build something solid based on good foundations? Typically, when you build an app that's going to require authentication and users to log in, you probably should fix this from the start, because it's better to have it in place forever than trying to shoehorn it, a little bit later. And so, even though it's not software engineering, I think vibe coding on its own is a skill as well. And, some of our users, they can literally build, almost anything, because they know how to slice it, and how to check things. And another thing that makes people very successful is to stop the bleeding when things do not work. And I think it's true for any type of AI assisted coding, or even a conversation with an assistant like ChatGPT. If things are not going right and you have a misunderstanding, you should not try to
You have to know
just
when to
fix it.
pull that plug.
Yeah, you should just go back, revert, or go back, edit your previous message, and try to communicate a bit differently there, rather than trying to get out of a rabbit hole. I think that's one thing that makes a difference between, failing and getting stuck and never getting out of it, and someone being successful. And it's really, really hard to give up on the thing it's a sunk cost, right? So
Taking that to the extreme, there's a whole, meme, I guess, about like the way to use these tools is to, um, you know, like each time you issue a prompt, like you're testing that prompt, and then if it fails, like you start back at the beginning and like you issue all of your, known good prompts, or you have them in a doc, and then you have it like go through and build up from nothing, or build up from some checkpoint based on like what has worked well and got you to this point. Like, it strikes me that that's not necessarily quite the same as like bailing on a task and popping back up and starting from scratch. Like, do you see a lot of folks? You know, is that distinction one that you see, and do you think it's a useful technique?
I know some users often build a first version of their app as a way to explore, and then they rebuild it with essentially all the requirements well defined second time, like 10 times faster. And I've done this myself with some apps I built when I was kind of playing around, not really knowing where I was going. So I built something and then I realized that I don't really want it to work like this. So I kind of take a lot of turns, and it takes me a while to go from A to B. And then I can kind of rebuild it from scratch when I know exactly how it should work. And it is actually pretty good. And that models are really good at, given a proper plan, to execute well. So when you can give them a more holistic view of what you're trying to build, you're more likely to be more successful. So I guess the takeaway is that the time you spend on planning is definitely not wasted, even though you are not getting anything done, while you're planning. And I think it's very much software engineering 101. When you start your career as a software engineer, you're just trying to code, 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 code. And the more experience you get, the less you write code. because you know that you should think a little bit more about it beforehand, and plan a bit more carefully so you're more successful. And I think the same lessons apply to vibe coding. So the more time you spend thinking about the problem you're working on, the more likely you are to succeed.
You made a comment about even if the models stop getting better, you can continue to significantly improve the product based on the current models. That kind of raises a question for me about like how much of the performance gains in a system like Lovable like come from um, just directly model iteration versus like the things that you've built or done around those models in order to use them well. And so I guess maybe the starting place is like, how do you think about those things? Like some part of it is like prompt and context engineering, some part of it is like the agentic loop. Perhaps some part of that is like fine tuning. I'm curious how much of that you do. Not to mention, a bunch of infrastructure stuff. Like, talk a little bit about, how you take these generic models that are given to you by providers and allow them to fit into a system that's really focused on helping people build successfully.
I think one thing that we have to admit is that the system you build must work in harmony with the models themselves. So, a lot of the AI engineering, which I guess is what I've been doing a lot for the past couple of years, is really very much dictated by how the models behave. And it's very much, it's super empirical there. I think even ML is largely empirical. When you're working with different problems, there's a lot of things that work where it's kind of unclear why it works. And a lot of the AI engineering ideas, I think, are just working around limitations of models. I think that's just what it is. And so we've been adapting constantly to newer generations of models and trying to harness the best out of these specific models. Like one thing I can mention is that in July, we released our first agent, because until then, Lovable was not agentic. We were not agentic because agents didn't work before. That's pretty much the story. Um, when I joined the company was doing agents, and it was doing a lot of agents. We had a very advanced and super complex architecture with lots of agents and hierarchies and stuff, and it didn't work. Like that's kind of what it was, because the agents were not good enough at making decisions and all that stuff. So we went back to something much simpler, something that was more workflow-ish, with some pre-processing steps, preparing a bunch of things, and then just trying to edit the code, and then post-processing steps, and et cetera, et cetera. And that worked a lot better. And the company took off, not because of that specific change, but things worked really well for us, and we were having the most reliable results I think you could get at the time. But then you just get new models coming out, and they actually work with agents. And therefore, you have to go back internally and say, hey, we need to throw away everything we've done. And I think that's one of the largest challenges of working with LLMs these days, is that you should not be attached to anything you've done, and you shouldn't have necessarily too strong beliefs that there is some sort of smarter architecture or anything. You just need to adapt to whatever you have. And now that the models are getting really good, I think is when things start getting pretty cool, because a lot of the architectures that people were trying when GPT-4 came out, that just didn't work at all because it was not good enough. These architectures are starting to work, and you can start thinking a little bit more about how can I harness intelligence, and how would I structure anything, assuming this sort of perfect intelligence that I can call anytime, because the models are really getting there. And that I think is super cool. And so for us, what we're trying to do is to not be too attached to any architecture. Just look at the current models we have, and what we've become pretty good at, I think, is just anticipate where things are going. And when we're building things internally, it's like the big AAA video game studios. They are always building for the next generation of video game consoles, like the next PlayStation or something like that. They don't even have it, but they just know it's coming, and they know specifications, I suppose, and they are just trying to prepare for it. And I guess we're kind of doing the same thing, except that we're in the dark. We don't know what's coming, but we know something better is coming soon. and you have to try to build something that doesn't work yet, but that's gonna start working, which makes a lot of things very, very challenging. And it also makes you not fix some things that you know are going to be fixed naturally by the models, because you have to think about your engineering investment. Like, would you rather fix something now that is just going to get fixed, automatically, or do you want to invest into the future? And there's always this trade-off where you need to make the product better today for your users, but at the same time you should think a little bit bigger. And I think every agentic company has the same trade-offs to make.
Can you speak a little bit more to the distinction between workflows and deterministic rules and all of that, and kind of a true agentic loop, agentic system?
Yeah, so workflows and agents. I think yeah, there's a lot of debates around these things, which sometimes can be a bit frustrating. But so to me, like really, agents are when you start letting models make explicit decisions around the next code path to take, in some sense. And workflows are when you have designed the algorithm, yourself, and you're just like sprinkling some intelligence in between. I do think that there is a fine line between both. There are some scenarios where you have a workflow with different branches, and therefore it's kind of an agent. It doesn't really matter. But yeah, the agent is more this sort of looping scenario where you just go back to the same place over and over again. And I do think a lot of advanced systems out there are a bit of a mix of both, where there's some agentic things and there are things that look a little bit more workflowish. And what I can say is that I think, like at Lovable, we don't think too much about this. We're just building a software system that tries to do the thing users ask for. Um, but but generally, the trend is to giving more power to the models, and just focusing on the feedback we give them anytime they take an action. What is the most relevant thing we could give them now, given the action they just took? Can we give them more signal? Anything to help them go in the right direction. That's where I think there's still a lot of untapped potential.
Yeah, thinking more concretely about a specific feature, for example, I think one of the things that Lovable has done relatively well compared to other agentic coding tools is like a little bit more like front end friendly. Like you do an app in Lovable and Claude Code is probably going to be a little bit more aesthetically pleasing and lovable. Um, what goes into something like that? Is it like, is it just context and RAG and giving it examples? Is it prompting? Is it are there rules or some other like more structure that you're using to, push the agent in that direction?
So everything is context, and some of it, there's also a very blurry line between sometimes prompts and more like generic context. Where, I mean, everything is part of the prompt in some sense, in the instructions. And I think, I guess that's why we're talking about context engineering now, because it's just essentially all the stuff you put in there and how you can nudge the model towards something that looks better. Um, Speaking of, I think the area of taste is extremely interesting for front end design, and I think the labs are working super hard on this. But it's a little bit harder to verify than some other topics. Um, but yeah, what it means for us is trying to come up with how would you communicate first to a human about design? How would a designer think about these things? How can you offload potentially the process of design to some more focused agents thinking about this? Trying to offload the context to something just more specific to it. Because I guess a good rule of thumb is that if you want to be top, like I guess for humans to not anthropomorphize too much, but if you want to be really, really good at something, you probably need to focus all your time on that thing. And I guess it's kind of true for agents as well when you think about their time as their context. So there's a lot of room there for basically specialization and becoming as good as you can be. And then yeah, obviously you can do a lot of retrieval, trying to bring relevant examples or anything like that. Um, and you have your template as well. Your template is kind of a prompt in some sense, like the code you already have is teaching you how to write new code. So all these things matter in the end, and it's not just someone writing a prompt that says, do something beautiful. It's it's a lot more than that.
What I'm also hearing in there is that, like, simply it starts from making that something that the LLM, the agent, is thinking about or is considering. Like, a user could put something very functional in the box, but the broader context that you're creating and giving to the LLM is telling it to, hey, also think about how this thing looks. And, this is the aesthetic of things that generally Lovable is trying to produce, and, that kind of thing. It starts with pulling it into the focus.
I mean, we didn't talk about this, but obviously things like basic chain of thoughts are helping. Where what you just want to create is that you want the model to go into the right zone in some sense. Like try to bring some keywords that are related to what you want. Just try to expand really, which I think is less necessary for thinking models because they are kind of programmed to do this a little bit. But you can still very much control the chain of other models to really bring them. Yeah, I think a lot about this as the right zone. Like you just want to be surrounded by the right tokens. If you think about the sort of latent space of all the things, all the thoughts you could have, you just want to be around all the things that speak about design, for example. You just want to be around that because you're more likely to go deeper. So there's a lot of work to make these things happen, and yeah, that there's some work to think about what does it take to do something great about a specific topic. How would you even think about this for yourself? Again, like I anthropomorphize a lot, but models are trained a lot on our input, so it does make sense that they need to go through the same thought process if there is any such thing.
Yeah, I mean, this makes sense to me. It reminds me a lot of, like, when I see really good AI generated images. Like, those prompts are using words and ways to describe the image that never would have occurred to me. Like, they're totally outside of my sphere. And just incorporating those terms, in your words here, kind of puts the model in the right design space for the output.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, talk a little bit about, like, how to do this at scale. Like, you were there at the beginning. Like, you've lived through the hockey stick of I think, what was the stat that in 8 months you guys got to 100 million ARR?
Uh, yeah. Um, yeah. So
That sounds
the
insane in terms of, like, what, the duck paddling under the water. Like,
it is quite insane, and we have had so much scaling issues where there's a lot of hindsight always where you think, oh, we could have avoided this and that. But I mean, to be honest, I don't think we should have anticipated this growth because we should have. It would have meant we were not focusing on the product enough at some point. Um, and scaling has been really hard on a lot of ways. There's a lot of scaling with understanding the user base also gets harder because we have all types of users nowadays on using our app. Where when I started, we were a lot more connected to the users we had, and we understood them pretty well, and the personas were slightly different. But on the engineering side, so we used to be a Python uh, backend for Lovable when we started, and we've been pretty public about this. We're using Python because I think a lot of AI products were using Python because that's the language closest to where the ML libraries are, and I think at the time we had no idea really what was gonna happen. So Python felt like, oh, this is probably the right place. But we had a lot of struggles in production when things started to take off, and I know we had reached our maximum capacity on our cloud provider. We just could not get more instances, and we were capping for many weeks. We could not get more users while things were taking off. Like you know, the the lines in our graph were kind of at 100% everywhere. Like we could not just get more load. And we also happened to take down GitHub at some point in December maybe, and we had to migrate off GitHub in a few hours in the office without too much thinking. And I think that event itself gave us even more growth. So it was even
what do
kind
you
of a
mean you
curse.
had too much load that you, like,
Yeah,
presented to you? Hit to GitHub API request limits or
Y-
something? Or
So we were at the time we were backing every Lovable project straight to GitHub. That was how it worked, and everything was in GitHub. And we just simply we created hundreds of thousands of projects in GitHub, and GitHub is not really meant for this sort of load where you have just so many projects under one organization, essentially. So we kind of killed their database, and I think one of their on call engineers just had to took us down at this point, and we didn't know anyone at GitHub, and we are a EU company, so we don't have so many connections in the US. Or at the time, we didn't know too many people, so we had to tweet. I think, hey, please, someone help us, and that tweet got very viral, and that brought a lot of a growth for us, ironically, in the next couple of weeks. And we've taken down a few providers. And but yeah, like the downside of this is you start having a lot more support requests. You have a lot of people coming to and our product is also a product that it's not like it's LLM based, so there's a lot of things that you maybe do not work or not correct. And we get so many requests of, oh, this thing is not working, this thing is not working, and we try to educate, and that there can be users that are not happy, which is totally fair because they see the limits at some point. So that's been really, really tricky. And we had a couple of months where I don't think we did anything but just firefighting, trying to manage the scale. And now we are I would say, a better place. And the team has grown. All of this stuff happened where we were just a couple of engineers, so it was uh, pretty tough. But now we're trying to hire some better engineers to fix everything, and we're in a more stable place. But one thing that's interesting as well, it's been really hard to get tokens from LLM providers because there's a proper shortage of GPU, and it's real. It's not a lie. It's and we do inferencing at some pretty crazy scales. I think I guess I can tell numbers, but we got some really like insane numbers when we had some events where the product was free for a weekend. When the graphs just kept going up and up and up. And we've had to work a lot with the partners, the labs to make sure we could get capacity. And that's been extremely hard to secure capacity as we've been growing so fast. And that there's a lot of competition as well there. And uh, yeah, so that part has been extremely stressful as well. To if you cannot keep growing because you just cannot get the tokens, that kind of sucks. But I think everybody is working to make that easier for us. And now that we are kind of a larger company, we have better contacts at all these companies in the Silicon Valley that we couldn't have before.
maybe going back to like this core user persona of someone who's like trying to build something. Do you think of them as being technical? Do you think of them as being not technical? Do you think of them as, today they're technical out of necessity, but in the future you want them to be non-technical? Like, how do you think about that? And part of that is like, a lot of the things that we talked about that you have to be thinking about or know how to do or be second nature, like, are fairly technical things. And if you're uh, not technical, like, it's very easy to get started, but it's also very easy to end up in a blind alley or in a hole. And like, it seems like that will cause a lot of frustration.
Yeah, I think it's funny. So most of our users are non-technical, and or they start being non-technical. But when you start programming, like, just to keep on with my analogy from before, when you start programming, you are non-technical by definition because you don't know anything yet. Everybody starts at some point, and they are non-technical. And you can learn to be good at Lovable or vibe coding the same way you can learn to be good at programming. And I think it's a bit underestimated that people learn. It's not because they're non-technical that they don't know, or like, being non-technical
It's
is
not
not
a
a bad
fixed
thing.
state. Right.
Yes, and it's also not a bad thing. You can be brilliant but non-technical. Like, these things are totally orthogonal, right? So a lot of our users, they start and they don't really know how to reason about building things, because I do think that you're right. This is a skill. It's a skill that you learn when you do software engineering or product management or project management, I guess, in your professional career, right? And they learn to do these things, and there are a lot of resources online on, like Lovable courses and how to think about things. And so the same way you learn to program, you can learn how to build things, how to do product management. So it's not really true that you're not doomed at all if you're non-technical. You can really learn to be lovable technical, whatever you call this. Really, you can learn the skill of understanding planning and also being a builder in general. Like if you're trying to get users, how to go out there and get users and decide when it's time. What's MVP, all that stuff.
That's true, and I'm willing to concede that, but that's very different from a lot of what I run into is like, um, yeah, there are 5 copies of a function that all do kind of the same thing, and like this is going to be a nightmare. Or like, why is state handled in this way? That's going to be a nightmare. Or like, why is the function have these arguments? Like that's kind of dumb. Like those are like those aren't project management things. Like those are software engineering-y kinds of concerns. And um yeah, I think I can anticipate that one of the answers is the models are just going to get better and no one's going to have to think about this. But that also, to me, like, um, it concedes a lot, I think.
I can speak for this because I mean you're right. I'm not like I never want to pretend things are just working and it's magical and we've solved AGI, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And and but one thing that's true is that a lot of our users learn to code also with Lovable. We have some power users from the old days before when the product was called GPT Engineer that have been using it for a while, and they were totally non-technical. And over time, they've learned to look into the code and try to understand what was going on, and they've really learned by looking at code being written. And then obviously, then you need to have the high intent, to learn something. But you can ask Lovable. I mean, that's one of the cool things. You can interact with this code and ask questions about it. And they have learned to look more and more. And then they have become these hybrid, I don't know, developers, vibe coders, whatever you call them. But they are technical and they probably could not write code without any AI help. They would probably they would not even know how to start. But with the help of AI, they know how to guide and they've learned how to architect things to some extent. And that's really cool. And some of them become full-fledged programmers. They just love it and they fall into this. And like you could be cynical and say that it's just saying that, yeah, vibe coding doesn't work, but I don't think it's true. I think first it's amazing that people find their way through coding, learn to code through this angle. I think it's super cool. I wish I could have learned to code like this, right? It's like someone always willing to help you. uh, but
I mean, I want to interrupt you because that's a really interesting point. Like, I think, you know, when you're learning to code and you're not coming at it from an academic perspective or like in a program where, you have this external pressure to learn to code, the advice I think that's most successful besides from like do it with other people, is, do it in the context of a problem that you care about, and that you find interesting. And if you don't know anything pre vibe coding, like there was nowhere to start. Like you could, find a GitHub that was kind of similar to what you were doing, but chances are it was like way too complex and, beyond. There's like, you know, uh, I think vibe coding does enable this kind of lift yourself up but from your bootstraps in a sense of like you can, create out of nothing this thing that you're interested in and it gets, far enough along that you can start to inquire about it and reason about the way that the agent has like decided to build it and then maybe try to decide different things at some point or learn some terminology and explanations and then research that technology and then that becomes the AI, the gen AI, like rabbit holes that we all get into when we're learning things about things that we don't know a lot about.
Yeah, we have lots of users who are it's like a new breed of programmers where they know a lot of technical terms, they understand the concepts, but they actually don't understand a lot of the low level stuff. And it can be a little bit jarring to communicate with such users because they have a very different mental model on how things work. They just learned, and it's like they just learned enough to do the things they wanted to do. So they understood what abstractions mattered and what things didn't matter. Um, and I mean, it's absolutely true that a lot of the code still written by LLMs is not good enough, especially at larger scales or where things get more complex. It's like harder to build upon. It's like you add layers and layers of complexity, right? And I don't think that's only on LLMs at all. I think the agent frameworks that we have needs to mitigate against this and to find ways to enforce some sort of rules and have the right guardrails. That's for sure. I really don't want to pretend that everything just works, because if everything just worked, then yeah, the everything would be over in some some sense.
Yeah.
So there's still a lot of work. There's still a lot of
Yeah.
work, but it's getting there.
Yeah, one more topic that I want to take on with you, and it's along the lines of this, or it's related to this, like technical versus non-technical user, is the idea of evals as being a like core element of success in building with Gen AI, systems. Um, there are takes on either side of that. We were talking a little bit about that earlier. To what extent do you think that you know evals and metrics are something that is important for your users to understand how to use? Like, certainly, you've got evals that you're using internally in the building of the service, but in using an agentic coding tool, like, do you have to be thinking about evals? Maybe it depends on what you're building. Like, talk a little bit about that from the user perspective.
Yeah, so I think no matter what you build, when you are building anything, any kind of software, you just have to wonder, how am I going to know that this is working? Uh, You know, uh, like, actually, I think even that in itself is a bit of a, again, going back to product management skill or software engineering skill, like learning to ask yourself, wait, why would I be doing this? And then once you've answered this question, like, how will I know that I did the thing I wanted to do? And I think for a lot of problems out there, that's when you should stop, because you realize that no, actually, I don't know if it's worth doing, or how am I gonna know if it worked? Um, so in software engineering, it's called tests, right? You can write tests. You can test your software through multiple ways. You can click around. That's the way of testing, I suppose. Or you can write proper tests that will be run over time, and this is how you verify that things do not regress, which is super important. And when you're doing anything with agents or building any AI based application, it's the same thing. Like, how do you know that it works? And then the takes I hear online are, well, you know that it works because you just tried the thing. You build it and you vibe with it. And I think I support that, sure. But how will you know that it stopped working? How will you know if things break, right? Um, when we were building Lovable, when I joined a year ago, we didn't have any evas or anything. It was just vibes everywhere, and that's great. Like, it's great when you start and you're trying to get the feeling of your product or your UX, whatever you're building, in place. But once you have that in place, you want to pin the performance, you want to lock the performance, right? And I think that's where evas come in, and you just want to say, I want to make sure that things do not stop working, and if they break, I want to know about it. The same way you write tests, when you do software engineering, you have continuous integration running the tests and telling you, oh, this one is not working since you made that change. You want the same thing with Gen AI applications. So that's one thing. And then the other thing, when you reach a scale like ours, or you have a product that's a bit more general, is that our users are doing every possible thing you could ever imagine. They're building projects connected to any API, any service, using any library, anything like that. So we want to start expanding the coverage of our evas to be, looking at, okay, I'm going to look at this library. I'm going to look at this use case that this, 5% of users are building this thing. I want to make sure that they have a good experience, etc., etc. And once you have great evas, what's pretty cool is that you can change your, I don't know, your prompts or your models or whatever, and get confidence that things are actually going to work better and release it to your users. That's one level. And the ultimate thing that everybody wants to do, I think, is that you want to build a self-improving product. The same way the AGL labs are always talking about, building this sort of self-improvement loops where the next
Under the
generation model gets
flywheel.
better. Yeah. And we want to do this as well. We have more users using the product. We get more data. We can analyze the data. We can understand what we should be changing. We can extract data sets for doing evals. We do the evals and so on and so forth. And you have this sort of thing that evolves over time and runs optimizations. And I think, everybody wants to do this. In practice, there's a lot of things that need to go right for this to be fully automatic. But if you don't have that, and I do think in the vibe coding space, actually, next year is the year where we're going to see who has been doing the evals seriously. I think basically your products are going to fall apart if you don't have that. Because as you get more and more
And are you
complexity.
talking about the vibe coding company's products or the products that the users are creating with those products?
I mean, I think both to some extent, because I think the incentives are aligned there. So I think both, and as these products become more and more powerful, like we're gonna be able to do literally anything in Lovable at some point. How will you be able to there's no way to vibe check this product anymore because it does all the things. Like, are you gonna try everything? You absolutely cannot do that. So you need to have some sort of guarantees that you're not breaking things for some users, and evals are really hard. Like, I think the labs have not figured them out, and it's still a small subset of what people are doing, no matter what you do.
Awesome. Well, Alex, this has been a super interesting chat. It's been great catching up with you and talking a little bit about what Lovable's been up to and what you're seeing out there.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It was super fun.
Thanks so much.